Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It's CJ. Hopefully, everyone's having a fantastic Saturday so far. Getting ready to kick off the Schiller Institute's webinar, No More Urgent Than Ever. Afghanistan is an opportunity for a new epoch of mankind. They will be kicking off this webinar here pretty soon. I want to thank the Schiller Institute as well as the LaRouche organization for allowing us to simulcast their events and share the information. As we know, it's just, very vital opportunity right now to take a look at what's unfolded. And I think everyone's kind of taking the stance at this point with beating up Biden pretty bad and the administration's handling. However, I think bigger picture is the opportunity for the United States to pivot. I don't think it will happen, but an opportunity for us to embrace and take a multinational approach to help Afghanistan, along with China and Russia. And I believe that's what we'll hear today, that the Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche, will be advocating for. So they're going to be kicking off their conference here shortly. Again, it was scheduled to start at 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Happy Saturday. Again, it's just very interesting times. I was out and about today and could not believe the amount of businesses that were closed. Their lobby, their front entrance areas were closed due to no staffing. And it's not isolated. It's a lot of different businesses that are being impacted right now. So we're living experiencing some very turbulent times. And I'm going to turn my screen over right now to the Schiller Institute for their conference, and it's kicking off right now. So hopefully everyone enjoys this, and we will see you on the other side. Thank you.
Good day to you, wherever you may be in the world. We want to thank you for attending today's special meeting of the Schiller Institute. In this meeting, which is entitled, What Just Happened in Afghanistan, Now More Urgent Than Ever, Afghanistan is an Opportunity for a New Epoch for Mankind, is being called largely as a result of the fact that 3 weeks ago, we met exactly on this platform with several of the people that you're about to hear from. In the notice that came out, and this was only a couple of days ago for this meeting, we began it by stating, with nearly all policymakers and strategic analysts in the transatlantic sector of the world in a clueless state of utter chaos and hysteria over the developments in Afghanistan, Schiller Institute founder Helga Zepp-LaRouche today convoked an urgent international seminar to pursue the only available solution to the crisis, peace through development. The seminar will continue the prescient discussion held by the Schiller Institute 3 weeks ago. And because we're going to go right into the discussion, and today is a little bit different because we've assembled a panel which is comprised both of those who were with us 3 weeks ago exactly, and a few others. And the conception is to try to answer a question that came up and was asked by several people, whether that was in Germany or whether it was in the United States, which is what went wrong? Why was it that in a matter of what appeared to be minutes, Afghanistan, at least the regime that had been ostensibly imposed by the United States over the past 20 years, seemed to evaporate? That clearly didn't occur, but something that did occur means that we ought to consider how it is that the kind of chaos that we are seeing in our world as a whole, not merely in Afghanistan, might be addressed in a different way. I'd like to refer, just before we go to Helga Zepp-LaRouche to begin our proceedings today, to a sentiment that was stated by Lyndon LaRouche on a document that he wrote back in 1982 called The Toynbee Factor in British Grand Strategy. He said this. He said, in a properly ordered republic, as the forces around Benjamin Franklin and George Washington understood this point, the greatest single source of potential danger to that republic is the sort of estrangement of the citizen from rational comprehension of national policy issues which prevails in the United States today. The most essential thing for a republic is to develop a citizen into an adult with the qualities of a true citizen. These qualities subsume the ability of the citizen to focus upon and to comprehend in a rational way the great issues of national policy. The entire history of modern civilization demonstrates that such qualities of citizenship can be cultivated in people in only one manner. That manner is a teaching of classical literary culture, classical musical culture, classical principles of plastic arts composition, and classical principles of scientific thinking. They are all situated within the frame of reference of a comprehension of national and world history as a process of universal history. This is called the Schiller Institute, and it's named after the poet and historian Friedrich Schiller. The reason that this was created, and I'm sure Helga can tell you a lot better than I can about that, since she founded it, was to try to bring this conception about understanding classical principles, including the principle of tragedy, into the forefront of the actual policy making and deliberation, not merely of the United States, but of every nation in the world. And so to start us off, and then we'll introduce our entire panel for today, it's my honor, as always, to introduce Helga Zepp-LaRouche, founder and chairman of the Schiller Institute.
Well, let me greet you too, wherever you may be. Well, I find it actually quite, satisfying and interesting that we had exactly 3 weeks ago a seminar here on this channel on the situation in Afghanistan. And I made the point at that time that I compared it in terms of importance to the fall of the wall in '89, which was the beginning of the end of the Soviet Union. And I said, it may maybe not be quite as big as the collapse of the entire Soviet Union, but what is happening in Afghanistan is of the same nature because it's an end of a system. Now, I'm not sure how many people thought that that description was accurate, but then, only a few days later, you had the very, very sudden collapse of the Afghanistan army. The Taliban took over, and unfolding events, which are now still pretty chaotic. So, in a certain sense, everything what we said 3 weeks ago in terms of what needs to be done, what needs to be the solution, an economic integration of Afghanistan into the Belt and Road Initiative, uniting, the already developing projects between the CPEC, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the cyber pass into Central Asia, all of that remains to be absolutely true. So naturally, when this happened, unbelievable freakouts occurred. There were discussions, like, for example, the CDU chancellor candidate in Germany, Armin Laschet, that this is the worst crisis of NATO since its beginning. Other people were talking about Saigon 2020, saying this is the absolute failure of the West. And, I think this discussion will continue because a whole bunch of questions erupted. Why was there such a collapse of the army? Why did the army not fight? Why was there such an intelligence failure? What came out in terms of the inability or not being prepared at all by the United States, by the European governments to take care of even their own soldiers, leave alone the Afghani, co-workers who had helped in the 20 years of the stay to evacuate them. Now, this is all, in flux. I think that the importance to push for quick economic development is of the utmost importance because, you have Afghanistan is among the 10 poorest countries in the world already. It's hit by a terrible drought. One of 3 people in Afghanistan are food insecure. Now, then we have a pandemic, naturally. So the worst thing which could happen is that some smart people or not so smart people in the West think in terms of financial warfare, saying, okay, the military option is out, because you can't win in Afghanistan. That has been proven now by the British, the Soviets, and now NATO. You can't win militarily in Afghanistan. So why don't we use financial warfare? And what is the beginning reaction could become that, namely that the United States has frozen the assets of the Afghani government, which is about 9 billion in the Federal Reserve and other American banks. It's about 1.2 billion of that is in gold reserves, and there are about 300 million in terms of foreign reserves. The German government has cut all humanitarian aid. And, there is right now clearly, the danger that in this incredibly fragile situation, that if the West would decide to stir now military uprising combined with financial warfare in the hope to create chaos, and then the Taliban will go away, whatever. But this we need to discuss. I think this would be the biggest foolishness you can possibly think. I think, I'm very happy and I'm thankful for the other panelists to come together here, because I think we need to immediately establish the idea that the only way you can straighten out the situation is to offer aid to Afghanistan, to the new government. I understand that today some of the Taliban leaders and also the former President Karzai, Abdullah and various other forces are gathering in Kabul to discuss the formation of a government. I think this must be stabilized and not think in terms of geopolitics, because as we discussed it in the first panel 3 weeks ago, on the one side you have the crisis in Afghanistan, but this is a reflection of a very deep-seated problem in the way the West has been conducting these endless wars: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya. The list is very long, and it does reflect on is this policy viable, or is Afghanistan not rather the menetekel, the writing of the fire letters on the wall of Belshazzar? And some of you, I'm sure Ray McGovern knows this beautiful poem by Heinrich Heine about Belshazzar. Is Afghanistan not the menetekel for the entire Western civilization? And is it not high time to change those axiomatic assumptions about Russia, about China, about the Belt and Road Initiative? Because the offer to cooperate is still there. From the Chinese, it's there. From the Russians, it's there. So I think that we are really in a incredibly traumatic situation, exactly as we discussed it 3 weeks ago. But now, in the meantime, events have proven that our discussion was absolutely prescient.
Sorry about that. Are you able to hear me? Okay, now we got a little technical problem. We got it straightened out. The interference there. Okay, so okay, well, let's go. Let me just. So you've all now seen our panel. You will hear from them all in a moment, but I'll introduce everybody that you just saw. Professor Pino Arlacchi, sociology professor at the Sassari University, director of the UN. You got to go back to the other screen because. Okay, and I'll just do the introductions. And former European Parliament Rapporteur on Afghanistan, Mr. Ulrich Schultz, former career officer, NATO fighter pilot, NATO air war planner. He says he's self-employed consultant and author with a focus on philosophy. He will be an interesting He has an interesting motto. He says, forget your explanations, and then you will see. That's sort of the theme of our whole show today. There will be Ray McGovern, analyst with the Central Intelligence Agency for 27 years and the co-founder of Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity. Mr. Hassan Daud, the CEO of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa Province Board of Investment of Pakistan, and then Hussein Askary of EIR. So what we're going to do, first of all, to both avoid any technical problems, but also just to get ourselves really moving, is we're going to have short statements from everyone following on what Helga said, some of whom were with us last week, as was Professor Arlacchi. I'm going to ask him first to give us both his reflections and any ideas he would like to present now to get the discussion going.
Thank you very much. I heard Helga's picture of the situation. I agree entirely. I want just to make some remark on, first, the so-called intelligence failure in Afghanistan. True, but which kind of intelligence? Government intelligence. I mean, in many occasions, I saw very good analysis on Afghanistan in the last 10, 15 years that were perfectly predicting what would happen. It was very clear already 15 years ago that there was no military solution in Afghanistan. I wrote a report, the strategy of the European Union for Afghanistan, when I was in the European Parliament in 2010. It was approved with a large majority. And in that report, the center of the report was no military solution, change the way EU and the United States are providing aid to the country, because most of this aid was wasted or never materialized, eliminate narcotic production through alternative development, and stop thinking that the strategy of decapitating the Taliban could work. Decapitating means literal decapitation, or even political and military decapitation. I was there in Afghanistan for a couple of weeks, and I could see with my eyes that the situation was hopeless. There was no way the United States and his ally could win, or could even achieve a stable result. So there was no doubt for me and for whoever read my report that that situation was with no solution. Now, why the government collapsed so quickly? That's quite obvious. Every big change in the history happens starting underneath, and then at a certain point reaching a breaking point, like revolutions, like collapse of systems and so on. This is a pattern that is quite known. What struck me very much is the opposite of what I see in the media. The media, international media, are making a huge mess, the issue of Afghanistan as a huge catastrophe. What I really do not see is any serious fact or data. I see that the country is relatively stable. There is no fighting going on. There is no bloodshed significant. I saw just a couple of cases of vendetta. I see that everyone is waiting for the new government. I saw a quite interesting statement by the Taliban about their intentions, and there is a huge gap between this catastrophic image of the media and the reality. And I believe that this is a main issue that can cover can cover plans. Helga says the financial warfare. Maybe not being able to win militarily. There can be other ways to continue to spread the chaos in Afghanistan. But I don't know. My interpretation of all the issue of all the war in Afghanistan is that it was a huge business. We have a huge industry, which is not just the security industry, it's not just the military industry, it's also the media industry, who is interested in selling fear, in obliging, first of all, the American government to invest a disproportionate amount of money in armaments and wars. And media also, they need a continuous state of fear and hostility to sell copies and audience. And now this big business is over, basically. They have to find other enemies, other fields, other issues that can produce fear in the population, that can justify military budgets. I do not see other real big issue. There is also the geopolitical issue, the fact that is very clear that the winner in Afghanistan are not the Taliban. The winner in Afghanistan is China. China got Afghanistan offered like a good wine by the Americans and by us, by the Europeans. They now, whatever they do is fine. They did not spend a huge amount of money in Afghanistan. They are ready to provide help and aid. They have no big issues with anybody there, not to the Taliban and not to also with the others. So the concern, the geopolitical concern, the fact that you can have a kind of arc of, I would call it Eurasian arc from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, Russia, Central Asia, and Turkey. Turkey is making now a double game, which is not very clear, but you can have a full part of Eurasia, and of course China, completely out of the reach of Western powers. This can be a huge motivation to do not bet on the stabilization of Afghanistan and to transfer in Afghanistan the big geopolitical confrontation that we know is still in place. This is my view. Then I have to say something about narcotics, but maybe we can, because there is another issue that I see in newspaper, even fake information on narcotics is really outrageous. But I prefer to stop now, and maybe I can say something later on.
Okay, well, very good. And if you've just joined us, you are now watching and participating in a special forum by the Schiller Institute called What Just Happened in Afghanistan, Now More Urgent Than Ever. Afghanistan is an opportunity for a new epoch for mankind. In other words, very different than particularly the narrative that is appearing in the American media and also, I would say, the European media. But the next person that will speak to us and may address that in part is Mr. Ulrich Schultz, a NATO air war planner, formerly a fighter pilot and self-employed consultant and author with a focus on philosophy. So, go right ahead, sir. Welcome today.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for having me on your show. And I'm happy to clarify a few things because the media are not very good at this, especially in the moment when everybody is focusing on saving these people at the Kabul airport, and people tend to forget that who's responsible for all this and how did it all start. I'd like to address two things so you understand where I'm coming from. I'm a graduate of the United States Air Force Air War College. It was the best the best 1 year of my life, as the commandant of the War College said. He was right. The American General Staff officer education is focusing mainly on strategic and politics, and with a lot of philosophy. And that's how I got into philosophy, when I later started to look at war studies and wars, and how did they happen, and why are they doing it again and again, the same mistakes. As Mrs. LaRouche said, NATO and the US have embarked on 4 major air campaigns after the Cold War: Yugoslavia, Kosovo, Afghanistan, Libya, and against the Islamic State. And what I learned at the War College, and I want to give this to you, is that all these 4 wars were against all rules the military learn at their war colleges. The buzzword is joined. If you go to war, as Clausewitz said, it is maximum violence and you apply it. And then it happens fast and you win it. And especially with the US on board, you can win any war. And also this war was won in a very short time. The problem is, and this is where my focus is on, is the political aim. And there I blame the generals, because when the US, when Washington considers using military force, then they will ask the generals, can you do it? And the generals should ask back, what is the political aim? What should be achieved once we have finished? And all these 4 wars I just quoted, there was no clear political aim, and there was no general who said, we cannot do it. And so the mess we are in is right there, where generals fail to tell the president, in this case, that we cannot do it with military means, what you want to achieve in Afghanistan. So there's the big flaw. And you can bomb them, and then the bombing will extend the war, as it happened in Kosovo. I remember when in the press conference, the spokesman of NATO was asked, what happens if Milosevic doesn't go out of Kosovo? And he said, we keep on bombing. This is, I think it's a scandal. I mean, they call themselves expert, and they're killing people day by day. They're destroying a country, and they don't know really what the outcome should be. And we have seen it in Iraq, and now we are in the same mess in Afghanistan. So what I'm saying is the military and the so-called experts on the political side, they didn't do their job. And now philosophy, I don't know if you're familiar with cybernetics, second order cybernetics, first order cybernetics. First order cybernetics means there's always a true and a false. There's a right and a wrong. The sun rises in the east and it sets in the west. So this is first order cybernetics. Second order cybernetics means what reality is depends on the observer. And this sounds very abstract, but it becomes very clear when, for example, you the label terrorist. Now, Taliban. If we label somebody terrorist, there's no negotiation. There's only one way to deal with him, is kill him. Now we have this government, and we have to talk to them. Now, if we by labeling them, and we have done it in other instances as well, shut the door to some sensible talks where we can move on and perhaps then get into a more peaceful times. In Vietnam, if you remember, 1973, we saw a refugee crisis where people were hanging on helicopters to get out when the Americans left. Today, American pensionists are playing golf in Vietnam because it has the most beautiful golf courses in the world. You know, then if you look at, I don't know, 4 million deaths, now we have Afghanistan, and I don't hear anywhere in the media that our governments, including the German ones, is talking to the Taliban government to solve this crisis. Nobody, I hope they do talk, but I think this should be the first thing should do something started, is to recognize that they are there, and they're not terrorists, but they are people who have interest. Terrorism, by the way, as a military man, is a way to fight. If you don't have aircraft carriers and an air force, and you have a huge, big opponent like the US, if you want to fight them, you try to fight them where they are soft. So they use terrorism. Now, what I'm saying is second-order cybernetics, which means not only empathy with the other side, it means also questioning one's own thinking. And that's what I mean by my motto. You know, forget your explanations and you will see. We should stop. We should get out of our pattern of language, because we immediately do first-order cybernetics, meaning you are bad, I'm good, and that's why I get anywhere. So I ask, it's a mindset. I ask that we promote more that politicians and generals look at themselves. What is wrong in my thinking that I don't get further with my enemy? Oh, that's all. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. If you've just joined us, we want you to know that you are watching the Schiller Institute special broadcast, What Just Happened in Afghanistan. And we are saying now more urgently than ever, Afghanistan is an opportunity for a new epoch for mankind. When we began the broadcast, I referred to a particular passage from a writing by Lyndon LaRouche, in which he argued that the big problem in the United States is to develop the citizen into an adult with the qualities of a true citizen. And he stated that it's needed to make sure that each citizen has an exposure to classical culture. I don't know what he has planned for us right now. He may have nothing planned for us, but Raymond McGovern, who was CIA analyst for 27 years, well known for having appeared here several times and is co-founder of the Veterans Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, has a knack for employing the idea of classical culture in ways that I think probably some of his friends find irreverent and we find very refreshing. So we're happy that he's with us here. And take it away, Ray.
Thank you, Dennis. Let me start off by saying, in my view, this is a liminal event. Liminal meaning threshold, about as significant as 9/11. When you think it through, this does create new opportunities. And my bottom line here is that the Taliban, with some very good PR advice from Russia and China, are adopting a rather conciliatory outlook, view, and it should be all of our responsibility to, well, doverai no proverai, trust but verify. In other words, if the Taliban follows through with some of the promises they have made in that very remarkable press conference, well, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's see if they do follow through. So the question really becomes, how do we verify that? I mean, we can trust, most people would say, don't trust the Taliban. Well, most people said, don't trust the Soviet Union, right? But if we can verify, then there's possibly a liminal event here where we can cross over into worldwide cooperation rather than confrontation. And I think it is necessary, as Dr. Arlacchi already has mentioned, that we pay some attention as to what U.S. motives were, why this 20-year escapade went on inexorably. And it has to do with what I call the Mickey Mat, the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. Now, if you look at how this campaign got started and was prolonged, well, Ron Paul, who knows whereof he speaks, having spent so long in Congress, talked about a gravy train, talked about the people who make all these armaments, helicopters, and everything else. The lobbyists who get paid for lining the pockets of Congress people. It was a boondoggle. Now it's over. Oh, over? Well, as others have already suggested, there will be other ways sought to continue this boondoggle. Now, I would like to just comment on what I see as the cardinal requirement here, and that is to hold the Taliban's feet to the fire now. They have made some promises. How do we find out whether they're keeping those promises? Will the New York Times tell us? Give me a break. Will the Pentagon tell us? Come on. In other words, the intelligence on what was going on in Afghanistan was under the thumb of the military commanders. And I refer not only to General McKenzie, who was commanding CENTCOM, and where the buck stops in the military way, who announced, for example, on the 14th of June, 2 months after Biden said, we're out of here, he announced, we're withdrawing all air support. There will be no more air support for the Afghan forces. And the only way we would resume air support would be were there a threat to our homeland or the homeland of our allies. 2 weeks later, the biggest air base in that part of the world, Bagram, in the middle of the night, they departed from it without even telling the local commanders. Now, I ask you, what would that tell the Taliban? What would that tell the Afghan army? I mean, should it be a surprise that all these little deals they made on the side with the local commanders and with the local officials, that they put them into place and rolled into Kabul about 13 days later? No, it shouldn't come as a surprise. So the question is, was General McKenzie just dumb in giving this signal? Was it sort of like an invitation? Well, maybe call me a conspiracy theorist. I would suggest we think about that. But a lot of my friends who have closer ties with very senior military officers at the 4-star rank tell me, no, it's not insubordination or treachery. It's just that they're dumb. Dumb as a doornail. Now, what does that say? That says that they will continue to act with the media enrolled in this effort to create pretexts to intervene. And so we can't really depend on any intelligence from the military, and still less intelligence from the civilian intelligence services like the CIA, because when the US Army is at war, independent intelligence analysis is verboten, okay? It's not allowed, okay? So my main message here is that since the Taliban seems to be rhetorically acting in a benign way, the world community, not the US, not the US media, not the Petraeuses or the Jack Keens of this world, but the UN, perhaps, the people who have a vested interest in this, people who will be in the receipt of countless thousands of Afghan refugees now, they have an imperative to monitor what's going on in Afghanistan. And if, as I dearly hope, and I would guess is probably going to be the case, there's a new Taliban, sure, they're going to follow their own ideological instincts. Women will not be in good shape under the Taliban. But this is a cultural thing. I mean, women are discriminated against by the Catholic Church. And nobody says anything about that. No, they're not so much oppressed, but they are kept out of leadership positions, avowedly, openly. So these are cultural things, and they should be understood as cultural things. And I applaud once again the organizers of this little seminar to discuss these things. And I'm not only happy, but eager to answer any questions having to do with the intelligence, such as it was, with the prospects of a metanoia, a change in outlook on the part of leading American officials. Hint, spoiler alert, not much prospect there. And again, the need for the international community to come in here, not only China and Russia, but Iran and other people in the near part of that world, Pakistan especially, India too, if they can stomach what's happened, and get together and make sure that they hold the Taliban feet to the fire. It should be possible. It's going to be a little bit difficult if, as people fear, the U.S. considers the primary effort to be not to lose an enemy or to find enemies wherever they might be. So I'll close on that, just mentioning once again, as Dr. Arlacchi did, that the MICIMAT, the military-industrial complex, or as I say, the military-industrial congressional intelligence media as in all caps, academia, think tank complex will be ruling the roost. And if you look at Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, I mean, I had high hopes for him. But then I looked at his record. Under his tutelage in CENTCOM, the command involved in Afghanistan, the intelligence was massaged to coincide with what Austin and his fellow generals wanted to promote. That was clear. 50 intelligence analysts, 50 in Tampa, where CENTCOM is, protested the politicization of that. And last, I just mentioned that when the Marines, when the LA Times reported that the CIA moderate rebels were getting into firefights with the Pentagon moderate rebels in Syria, and we were funding to the tune of $500,000, $500,000. We were investing that in training moderate rebels to go in there into Syria and do their job, okay? Now, Austin was just finishing his career at CENTCOM. Almost the next day, he joined Raytheon. What does that tell you? Anyhow, he's before Congress, and Congress is saying, look, we invested $500,000 in training people to go into Syria. How many people are still there that we trained? And Austin looked at them, and without blinking an eye, he said 4 or 5. Now, I didn't know how to interpret that, but now I do, okay? What he was saying is, you gave us $500,000, and we only were able to put 4 or 5 in there. So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? In other words, Congress doesn't have much power over what the military does. That's why an international effort precisely is what's required. Thank you very much for your attention.
Yeah, and thank you very much, Ray. We are going to start our discussion actually with a comment from Professor Nipa Banerjee. She is a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa School of Social Sciences, and she's with us here. So, Professor, welcome.
Hello. Thank you for having me in this session. It has been difficult because the last few days been frenzied with media calls and all that, but I will try my best. Well, I will just comment on the themes and some of the areas I'm sorry, this is not working out on my there's a bit of a problem. I'm asking you, do you see me properly? Hello?
You're a little, you could shift a little bit. Yes, we can see you.
This is okay?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm sorry about this. I will comment generally on some of the themes first, and then refer to some of the issues and some of the areas in which the panelists have referred to just now. I have to say that I was in Afghanistan for 3 years, between 2003 to 2006. I was representing the Canadian government, the aid program mainly, and I started with, I was there at a very motivating period because things were happening, at least we thought that things were happening, things were blossoming, and we were very pleased. However, gradually, starting about 2007-8, things started deteriorating. I came back from Afghanistan in 2007, early 2007, and joined the university. From that time, I've been visiting Afghanistan every 2 times a year, until about a year and a half ago, when I found the security situation was deteriorating so badly that my husband actually wouldn't let me go there anymore. But I have a vast number of friends, young friends mainly, with whom I worked there. Some of the Dr. Ashraf Ghani himself and some of the other ministers I knew extremely well. Those times were different because they were different days. And these young Afghans that I kept in touch with, some of them are working, some of them are in NGOs, some of them are working with the government. I have very close relationships with them. And throughout this period of crisis, I have been in touch with them, and I'm hearing things from them firsthand. I'm helping some of them to get sort of their flights out into safety. We'll see what happens on that score. But I was a bit surprised to hear from one of the panelists that everything is very positive. There is no violence, no killings. But this is not exactly what I hear from the people who are there and who are looking at things. And what they said that, yes, and I was very enthused about that also. Yes, the Taliban had a press conference. I think that Taliban being in a press conference is really achievement of the last 20 years. It took time, but that they would attend a press conference and have announcements which are positive. Whether or not they can be trusted is an issue, but they have made statements. So, there are achievements, but at the same time, this question remains whether or not they can be trusted, and by the Afghans themselves. I'm not talking about the international community necessarily, but the Afghans don't know if they can. They have said that, yes, there are announcements, we are hopeful. And in the very beginning, people were going out in the streets and they were not stopped. And people who were apparently stopped are some of the Taliban rogue elements who were conducting this violence and terrorist activity still, and going into people's home and dragging out people, as well as taking them away. And people were concerned that they would be killed. But these are, Taliban leadership has said that these are rogue elements. Now, probably the truth lies somewhere in between. which my Afghan friends are telling me. They say that they are hopeful. They have to be hopeful, but at the same time, they don't know if these things will persist. And so, this is therefore, I don't think we need to take a very positive attitude. I mean, we can take a positive attitude, but we have to be careful as to what's happening in the country. And so given that, I would give a few of my thoughts as to what can be done, and also I'll comment on the theme in general. I agree that there is hysteria triggered by the fall of Kabul. The fall was in the making for the last 15 years. I wouldn't say it's 20 years, because the first 5 years, were settling period and things were happening. The fall was in the making for the last 15 years, and yet for the international community and Afghans that had been in, the international community and the Afghan government had been on denial, I would say. There are examples that I don't know how many of you have gone through the Washington papers. The Washington papers brings out what the commanders, US commanders, were saying about the war. And now these were secret papers. Washington Post has found the papers and they have published it. I would advise you to read the Washington papers, where it is evident that the people were that the commanders were doubting that there was victory, and they were concerned that there was failure coming up, but this was hidden, and there was an hubristic attitude amongst the commanders, amongst the leadership, not only US, I would say in general the international community, and the real things never came out. You would be quite surprised to read the Washington papers, where it comes out clearly that the war was being lost continually, throughout this. And, we have our own, without the Washington papers, our own assessments. Long War Journal follows up. It's a US journal, and it follows up. It has been bringing up maps, every quarter, and we can see how the Taliban was extending its authority and territorial capture. And it came to a point that at least the Taliban was claiming that it was 85% of the land that was under their control. Well, I mean, maybe it wasn't 85% at that time, but now this is what it has come to. So, I wouldn't talk about a total intelligence failure. There was intelligence, but they were ignored and not followed up on. This is by the international community and the Afghan government as well. But the fall of Kabul was very quick, I would say. I am not extremely surprised, because I have been following, and I go to Afghanistan too, to have a look, to discuss with people. And these are not contracts with anybody. I go on my own with my own expenses and my own responsibility. I do not agree, however, that the current situation indicates that a 40-year war has ended. This is what I read in your institution's articles, that this fall of Kabul has ended 40 years war. I wouldn't say so. In fact, I fear the start of a civil war in Afghanistan. Indicators are vibrant for the start of a civil war. with local uprisings and development of the militia groups, etc. And the warlords are also working away in the background. Indeed, economic development is the first requirement to be met to contain further conflicts. Fully agree with the benefits to be accrued from China Belt and Road Initiative and coalition of the Western powers with China, Russia, and other regional countries. These are the priorities, however, for the longer-term solution. This is absolutely necessary, but they are for longer-term solution. And I am looking at the immediate scenario. Afghans are now facing immediate life-threatening issues, and those need immediate attention. I know this because I speak to Afghans stuck in Kabul every day. I believe that in the immediate term as well, an alliance between the Western powers and Russia, China, and other regional countries of South and South Central Asia must build an alliance to act for the benefit of the Afghans. I believe that at this time, isolating the Taliban will not be a judicious move, as millions of Afghans will be isolated along with the Taliban.
Can you hear me?
Actually, I'm saying, hello?
Yes, if you could just summarize, because we're going to go to discussion, in which case people will respond to you and you can respond as well.
You think? So, okay. I mean, this is what I wanted to say, that, I take a positive view of the Afghans wanting to coalesce with the Western world. And we should go for that and not say that we don't recognize the Taliban and that we will not have anything to do with them. But we also need to take a balanced view. Some of the panelists were extremely positive about the Taliban. I'm not so sure, that is the case. We have to take into account Afghan people's views on this as well. It's not on Western views that this should be decided upon. And I must mention one thing, which is that I do not agree that the women's issues is a cultural thing, and therefore we will ignore it.
We understand, but we're saying that we are about to have a conversation. Hopefully you'll be, if you want to be in it, fine. But people want to respond to you, and we got to stay on schedule. Okay.
Thank you. Well, I was told that I should comment on what the themes are.
Yes, you did, and we thank you for that. We just have to get moving. That's all. Thank you. Okay. All right. Can we go to full screen? Can we go to full screen and have everybody up so that we can actually continue the discussion? And if you happen to have just joined us, let me just say to people what this is, a special session that we joined, which is after a forum that we did 3 weeks ago on this matter. I think we're having a technical problem again with the sound. We need to fix that. All right, so what I want to do first, let's do it like this, because if we're having that problem of feedback, let's go to, I'm gonna select a few people to respond. So I'll start first with Helga, then we'll go to Mr. Arlacchi, and then to Ray. Okay, so Helga?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, the Taliban's feet have to be held to the fire. We are not saying there should be a blank check, blue-eyed trust into every word people are saying. But, we have made at the last seminar 3 weeks ago another point, and that is that the only way how you can affect a political change is by having economic development. And I would like the discussion to focus on that because we are in the middle of a pandemic. Afghanistan is like so many countries of the developing countries without an adequate health system. We heard last time from Professor Arlacchi, how many children are dying below the age of 5, maybe he wants to comment on that again. So I think that, rather than having ideological, debates, who is right and who, what is the fine-tuned meaning of this word and that word, we have a world in hunger, we have a drought, we have people suffering. And I think, the only way, and that is my deepest conviction, the only way how you bring peace to Afghanistan and to many other places in the world is through development. This is a concept which comes from Pope Pius VI. This was, it was Paul VI, I'm sorry, Paul VI, in his encyclica Populorum Progressio, about the development of all people. And I find this idea, peace through development, it is the only way, because how do you arrive at a common interest which is of a higher nature than the particular interest of factions, of groupings, of countries? You need to have a development perspective. And right now, I think the integration of Afghanistan into the development of, the neighbor countries, Iran, Pakistan, Central Asia, Russia, China, to integrate it into the Eurasian Economic Corridor, that needs to be put on the table. And I just read in my view, very silly statement by one person whose name is Tillmann Brück from the International Security and Development Center in Berlin, who said that the Taliban are not interested in economic growth because of their ideology and their nature. And I doubt that very much. I think the Taliban is now confronted with having to build a government. They have a tremendous crisis at their hand. They have many refugees which are not in Afghanistan, which are in neighboring countries. You have a drought. The drought right now is very severe. The crop of last year was very poor. If 1 of 3 people are food insecure, I mean, that is an incredible situation. And I think that needs to be addressed. And I think if one starts with the economic development program, which we presented at the last seminar, that is, in my view, the only fruitful discussion, because we are not commentators for the commentator's sake. I think there are 2 problems I would like to address. One is the actual situation in Afghanistan, how to improve the life for the people living there through economic development. And then a separate issue, but that in a certain sense is related, but very separate, is what is the implication of the Afghanistan debacle for the crisis of the West. But these 2 issues are in a certain sense separate, even if they are related. Maybe I could ask some of the panelists to address one or the two, or the second of these 2 issues.
Okay, very good. I think we may have solved our problem. Glad we have everybody up. So I didn't mean to keep Mr. Schultz out of responding. And I also want to make sure I introduce finally Diane Sayer, who's here. She's co-moderating, and she's got a bunch of the questions that are coming in. So we'll be getting to those as well. But Professor Arlacchi, have anything you'd like to say at this point? Sure.
Yes, I agree very much on the fact that we should not restrict our discussion on Talibanology. What are the real intentions? Why we should trust them or not? It's not very clever. I dealt with them 20 years ago. I don't know if I said already my experience in the last webinar, but anyway, I had to do with the top leadership of the Taliban when I was at the UN about the issue of narcotics elimination. And I found them quite reasonable interlocutors. And we are talking about the Taliban of more than 20 years ago. I had a meeting with the governor of Kandahar about the issue of reactivating a factory, a wool factory, which was donated by the German aid agency. This factory was good, could give work to more than 2,000 people, men and women, and it was not active. So with a small investment, of a couple of $100,000 could be reactivated, and then. So the governor said, yes, I have to consult somebody else. It means the top leader who was living there, close in Kandahar, close to our meeting. Then he got the okay, came, and we discussed the issue of women. He said, yes, but we have some issue about women working in the factory. Our answer was, no way. Women must work. If you don't allow women to work, goodbye our investment. He asked again to some time to consult Mullah Omar, and then came back, okay, women can work, but they should work in a different part of the factory. We said yes. And then we started to activate the factory. That then the investment was stopped because somebody else arrived. A foreign investor bought this factory. The foreign investor was somebody called Bin Laden, who was living at the time in Kandahar, close to where we were in the meeting. I informed the Americans about everything and so on. And this occurred in 1998. So they had all the elements about Bin Laden. Anyway, I don't want another. I want just to say that about the Taliban, I don't know this Taliban. And it would be really stupid to elaborate their hidden thought and so on. They made a statement. Now they have a government. And we will see. We should talk. Every government should talk with them, because everyone talked with them. The Americans are talking with them since 2 years. And in Italy, for instance, in this moment, we have a very silly debate, talking or not talking with the Taliban, which is really something that we should not, driven by this media hysteria about it. Yeah, I agree with Helga. They really should be what are now to do in Afghanistan to work for peace and development. And here I'm quite positive. I believe we have a huge space because, first of all, we don't need a huge amount of funds or money. Afghanistan is an extremely poor country. And if international aid will go in the right direction, it will arrive to the people with small investment, keep your ears, we can have a huge result. Let's take the issue that mostly interests the Europeans, should interest, which is narcotic production. As you know, almost all heroin consumed in Western Europe comes from Afghanistan. And now I'm reading on several newspapers that the Taliban cannot leave the control of opium poppy cultivation because they live on it, which is absolutely wrong. It's not true. You have very good studies made by the United Nations, not only the Vienna program, but also the Security Council, on the real amount of money that you can skim from opium poppy production. And the figures are the following. The Farmgate production last year, we just got this data just a few months ago from the survey that the United Nations do every year. The Farmgate value of production of all opium poppy in Afghanistan was $350 million. $350 million, which was much reduced from a peak of 2010 that was more than $1.4 billion. So Farmgate production is a very small figure. That figure invited in the past many governments to consider the idea to buy the crop and impede the drug trafficking all over Europe. When this 350 million arrives in Europe, in the streets of Berlin, Rome, and Paris, their value is around 10 billion euros. So there is a huge interest of the Europeans to intervene. My plan at that time was to phase out all production in 10 years, 5 years. First, eliminating production, 20% a year with an extremely small investment. At that time, the value of production was much less than today. But if we would like tomorrow, starting a plan in Afghanistan to eliminate opium production, we should invest, if we want 20% reduction a year, we should invest just $335 million, which doesn't mean, seems to be an important figure. But you have to have an idea, and you have to have a plan, and you have to have a correct sense of a proportion and all the issues that are involved. Even if the Taliban would appropriate all farm-gate production, like a big cartel that buys all opium in the country, the most they can get is 250 million. The budget of the Afghan government, the living government, is around $80 billion. So if the Taliban will establish themselves as the government, they have at their disposal $8 billion to govern a country of 38 million people. All these figures does not impress me. They are not really figures that can impress any international investor. So we have now the total international aid in Afghanistan in average last 10 years was around more or less 7-8 billion, more or less the entire budget of the government. So now, if we continue to invest in Afghanistan in a better way than in the past, the figure of international aid we did, we could achieve really substantial results. And when I say we, I say international community, all, not just USA and not just the Europeans who are the major investors. It has been until now the major international investors in Afghanistan. So we have now a big opportunity. We can seize this opportunity and start to make plans, or we can say that everything is bad, everything is impossible. Afghanistan will continue to be a disaster that has been in the last 40 years, and then all ideas and things to do. Okay, thank you.
Okay, very good, very good. Raymond, Mr. McGovern.
Well, I have to really thank again this forum for having people on who know what they're talking about. I mean, what can substitute for on the ground experience of 20, 30 years, such as Professor Arlacchi has adduced here? These are real figures. These are realistic expectations. And I applaud him for sticking with it and reminding us that a modicum of investment, not only from the West, but from everywhere. How about Tokyo? How about, Taiwan? Anyhow, and then Helga, I thank her for widening this discussion out to remind us that there's a pandemic going on, like COVID-19 and worse strains, and that economic development is essential. And that this you can't just dance around this. I would mention the climate crisis as well, because that endangers all of us. Now, with respect to other comments that have been made, I applaud them. And I think that the question here is the same one as I was asked yesterday on live TV, and that is, Mr. McGovern, do you think this is the new Taliban? And if it's the new Taliban, are they different? And are they going to change things? And I said, my guess is that it is, but that's just a guess. We have to watch what they do. We can't rely on reports from the Western press of the last week or so. We have to monitor what's going on, and we have to do that with independent monitors, not CNN, not Fox News, not MSNBC, and certainly not the US military. So that's what we have to do. We have to make sure that there's some sort of arrangement. I would guess the UN could do this, you know? And I really welcome the introduction of the Afghanistan papers published by the Washington Post. They speak volumes. Craig Whitlock, the author of those papers, which have been around for at least a year and a half, nobody's really taken much notice. They show that the U.S. military and U.S. civilian leadership knew that this was a fool's errand from the start. But it was a gravy train for the military-industrial complex, and they kept it going for as long as they could. Now, what were those papers? Those were from CIGAR, you know, not a cigar, but from the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, set up by Congress way back 15 or so years ago. Have his reports been accurate? Yes. Has anybody disturbed the gravy train because of their accuracy and what they showed? No. Okay. So my point here is that we need a cigar. We need a Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction who doesn't report to the U.S. Congress, who is on the gravy train, doesn't report to the U.S. military who's on the gravy train, or the defense contractors on the gravy train, needs to report to some independent entity. My best guess is the UN. There's lots of reasons why the Taliban should welcome them in, and there are ways to verify what the verifiers say. So let's get on with it. Let's recognize the economic problems, the deprivation of food problems. I mean, you know, women suffer when they can't get enough food. The climate thing, and then COVID. These are all big problems, but we're smart people. And if we put our minds to it, we can do a heck of a lot better than has been done over the last 15 to 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Ray. And if you've just joined us, you're watching and participating in the Schiller Institute International Forum. What just happened in Afghanistan? Now more urgently than ever, Afghanistan is an opportunity for a new epoch for mankind. I want to also just indicate that I understand that Mr. Hassan Daud, who was trying to get in before, is now going to be available to speak. But I want to go to Ulrich Schultz and ask him for any remarks he'd like to make in response or otherwise.
Well, as I mentioned in my introduction, and it was repeated here, I think the main thing is that we recognize the new government and right now and begin talking about getting the people out of the country who wanted to leave, who want to leave, and make it safe. I think that would be also a good gesture of the Taliban government if they cooperate there, and coming to there are not only talks already behind the curtains between Taliban and the U.S. government to exploit these. So I think there are opportunities, and I think that the Taliban government is interested in development, because no government wants its people to fall behind. So they are interested to connect to globalization. I think there's a big problem I see is that the U.S. government in 2000 under Clinton has published their own Silk Road strategy concerning the Central Asian states, concerning ties to the West politically and also, of course, economically. And now we have this new Silk Road where the Schiller Institute is promoting. So there's competition going on, and competition is good, but again, if it's under the headline of geopolitics, meaning getting influence, or the zero-sum game, my win is your loss, I think we have to get out of this. And I think they're the big governments of the world, if they want to pacify this part of the world, they must understand that it's for the benefit of others when they stop thinking in geopolitical terms and try to cooperate in the sense of a globalization where everybody, especially the poor, benefit from. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, what I want to do is to go back to Professor Banerjee. She has something that she'd like to say. But before we do that, just want to acknowledge that Mr. Hassan Daud is with us, the CEO of Khyber, Pakhtunkhwa Province Board of Investment. What we're going to do is let Professor Banerjee say something and then go to his presentation, which he didn't get a chance to give you. So, Professor, do you have anything to say in response? Excuse me, you're muted.
What?
Okay, go ahead.
Yes. Well, I mean, I think that most of the people who we heard from just now, I was not against any of those views. But my main concern now is the protection of the people who are inside the country now. And we cannot leave the Taliban completely isolated with the people of Afghanistan, because we don't know yet. Yes, we have to take a positive view of their intent to change. They've said that they have changed in 20 years, and we have to take a view that would support them. We cannot leave the Taliban alone, isolated completely from the international scenario, because we don't know what will happen to the people. There are 30 million people who are affected by this. I have heard very little on the concerns of the Afghan people in this session. We will have to focus on all the things that have been said in this session, yes, but those are longer term settlements. For the immediate term, there needs to be done something on the transition, and people should pay attention to these as well. Well, I mean, that's all. And yes, another thing I would end up with is that I do believe, as it has been proved, that there is no military solution for the Afghanistan issue. And economic development is the main thing that we have to focus on. And that is not for the Taliban, but for the benefit of the people of Afghanistan. And I very much support this view. And I would say majority of the international community, they are convinced about this issue, that economic development is the only option left with us. However, if they would coalesce in talking to the Taliban is an important thing. I believe there should be talks, but I don't know if the international community would. But I think that having worked within the international community, I would say that they know that there is no way to get out of this problem, and they would cooperate in doing that. But a balanced view needs to be taken in figuring out how much we can trust the Taliban. It is difficult to figure that out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor. And just want to say to everybody, what we'll do, Mr. Daud, I don't know how much of the conversation you heard. I think you were in for like the last part of this. If you go ahead and, so you're the only one that hasn't spoken yet. We let you go ahead. And then following, we have several questions that Diane has gotten. I'll also just indicate for people out there that are watching, questions at schillerinstitute.org. Questions at schillerinstitute.org. And we will attempt to get as many of them as possible. So, Daud.
Yeah, thank you very much. I have listened to most, but unfortunately there was some communication problem. But just let me quickly state more, what I feel, because I am the CEO of the Board of Investment of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which is the neighboring province of Afghanistan, and there are several things that we can relate ourselves to Afghanistan. One is that their population is around 39 million, and so is almost the same as in Afghanistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. And also, like Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Afghanistan is blessed with several natural endowments, including minerals, water, rivers, and also opportunities of having people who are hardworking. And this perhaps in long term could be converted into a solution through several initiatives, including the Belt and Road Initiative or China-led economic development and growth initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, in the period that America and NATO-led forces were engaged in war in Afghanistan, during similar time or lesser time, China was involved in creating sort of synergy for regional integration and bringing in infrastructure development projects, which included hospitals. And I can say this because I was involved in China-Pakistan Economic Corridor as project director, and I've worked closely since its inception in 2013. So from that time to as we speak, I think we have had projects in hospital, even in our newly merged districts, which were called as erstwhile FATA, just adjacent to Afghanistan. We have had 50 schools through that Belt and Road Initiative, CPAC. Also, we are now having burn centers and several other initiatives of power, energy, road infrastructure, agriculture sector, science and technology. Why I'm trying to advocate this? Because in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and also in Pakistan, we have seen rural-urban synergy coming. We have seen our economic growth, and despite all the challenges that we had in our past. So for Afghanistan, all its neighbors, including Iran, which is now consolidating its relationship with China through a very strong strategic economic partnership, Pakistan, which is involved in CPAC. Then we have the Central Asian Republic and Turkey, which are part of Belt and Road Initiative. So I think what Afghanistan can do and may do after we have a settled government in Afghanistan, owned and led by the Afghanis, they can actually reach out to China. And I think Chinese government has been very pragmatic and have been forward-looking in the way that their foreign minister Wang hosted the Afghan delegation and also went to several Central Asian republics to discuss the Afghan situation. I think Belt and Road Initiative and SCO, in which Afghanistan is also has the observer status, can actually benefit and work with Afghanistan to bring regional peace and prosperity. We also see a lot of work, possible work that can happen in mining and mineral sector, and perhaps Afghanistan, from where it is now, in next 6 months to 1 year, can fast track this development, not just in mining sector, but also in agriculture. And what we have to do in Pakistan is perhaps help them build their capacity to do mega projects. This development and this transition will require lot of support to Afghanistan from not just its neighboring countries, but also far and beyond, and also countries which were involved in the war, by supporting them and not looking at the past, but looking at the future, which Afghanistan, because of its strategic location, has. And if we can just have stability through development and prosperity through economic growth, I think this can happen. But please remember, it is difficult to build than to destroy. So this development phase will not be as easier. It would be easier said than done. It would require a lot of synergy, a lot of support by donors and agencies which actually have the agenda of poverty alleviation, supporting less developed countries and areas where there is poverty, and there will be poverty because it's a war-torn region. And just through development, just through projects, I think we can immediately, from where Afghanistan is today and the concern that we all are showing and the rest of the world is showing, we can make it into a prosperous land where history tells us, it was part of the Asian Silk Road and was the conduit of trade and business activities. A lot of Afghanis work and do trading with Pakistan and all its neighbors, Central Asian Republic, Iran, and beyond. And I also think that initiatives like TAPI and also the railway project, in which the earlier Afghan government was part, can actually link Afghanistan to the region and make it an important crossroad for development of the region. So this is all I have to say, because the rest would be like repetition of the points highlighted earlier. But I look at it as the tale of two cities. It is time of light and time of darkness, and perhaps if we actually contribute in the development of Afghanistan, we'll find ourselves surely in a place of light and prosperity. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I think what we'll do, we have a lot of questions, but at the same time, there may be something that people want to respond to from what they just heard. What I'm going to do is, Diane, I have one sort of evaluation I want to give from some people I talked to this morning. This is the combination of people, so no one question here. I'm going to offer this to the panel and see how you respond to this. You may want to go to just a single screen because of the background noise. And I'm going to offer this to everybody and ask for. We'll go back to full screen to see which of you would like to respond. So this is really from, well, really 4 or 5 different people spoken to today and who had questions, but we've compiled something, and it's the following. They are asking about the head of the political bureau of the Taliban, Mullah Baradar, that he's been negotiating with the United States for 7 years. He's been to Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran. And that when you're looking at the actual process that's going on, the United States is doing extensive discussions with China and with Russia. The Taliban has been sending delegations to Beijing and Moscow for years, but very intensively in the last recent months. The United States has been negotiating with people in the Taliban for the last 7 years, and that there's a convergence of interest in making sure that Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Uyghurs, the Chechens, the Baluchi group opposed to Iran, that nobody gets to establish or reestablish a sort of foothold in Afghanistan, that this is a general sort of minimum area of common interest. And the question that was being sort of discussed, these different people had different responses, was, is this the possible basis to establish, if this is done, an economic cooperation among the parties? Then obviously some of the parties are economically cooperating already, because there are various people in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that cooperate. And it was noted that the United States had a representative at the recent meeting that happened in Uzbekistan of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So that's the thrust of it. And I just want to see if anyone would like to respond to that.
Well, I can just start by saying that we've had, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and in Pakistan, we have had this insurgents, terrorism impacting our growth. We have seen our children dying. We have seen our school demolished in areas where terrorism and groups like that you mentioned had actually had positions. And even a few days earlier, we have had a project influenced by a similar incident. So I think this is the least convergence point. We, as a neighbor of Afghanistan, look at Afghanistan as a possible stepping stone for economic growth and linking ourselves with Central Asian Republic. So if Afghanistan government, any government that is formed and is formed by the will of the people of Afghanistan, I think they have suffered more than anyone else. They have had years, I think more than 30 years of destruction, and I think this is the time that they look at this. I've spoken to several Afghanis who work in Peshawar, and I think they would like to see a prosperous Afghanistan and look at their business growing. And if history repeats itself, I think that it will be great loss, not just for Afghanistan, but for all of us who are speaking for bright future for Afghanistan.
Thank you very much. I think Mr. Arlacchi had his hand up. Is that right? Yes.
Yes, just a few words, because in half an hour I should go. So just some consideration on the issue of terrorism and the danger of Afghanistan becoming a kind of stronghold of international terrorism. I believe that, first of all, decision on Afghanistan, on the political future of Afghanistan, depends very much on regional powers. So we should pay attention much more to what Russia, China, Pakistan, India, and Iran are going to do in Afghanistan, then, as usual, to what the Americans will do, the Europeans, if they will recognize the government, if they will talk or not talk, and so on. Situation changed completely. Now, the future of Afghanistan is in the hands of regional powers. Terrorism, anti-terrorism platform is an issue that basically gets the convergence of all regional powers. Russia, Central Asian countries, China, most of all. Iran is also very concerned about narcotics because it has a 2,000-kilometer borders with Afghanistan and is the transit country from all drugs from Afghanistan to Europe, and has a huge addict population, more than 700,000 people. Narcotics also is a good platform for convergence of regional powers in having an Afghanistan free of terrorism and the narcotic production. Terrorism in the area is mostly what the intelligence people call a blowback issue. It is the result of Western intervention in the area, is the result of the wars that has been carried out. ISIS, we say, is a product of Iraq war, of the really terrible decision of the American governor of Iraq to cancel with a stroke of a pen the Iraqi army. Many of that people, from one day to another, there was a 500,000 people army. Many of that people went away and arrived into ISIS, blended with the terrorist group that were already working in Syria, and they created this huge problem. So the more Western powers and army withdraw from that area, the more the chances of improving the situation in terms of peace. Is exactly the opposite of what Western media and the complex that we identified during the day wants. Is exactly the opposite. They want to create the impression that as far as Americans withdraw from Middle East and all countries there will explode, will be into chaos and so on. It is happening exactly the opposite. If you look at data on terrorism produced by the University of Maryland, is the most important database on terrorism, you see that since 5 years on a row, terrorist attempts and the terrorist casualties are decreasing, are 50% what they used to be 5 years ago. It's an astonishing result that these researchers cannot explain for political reason, but I can explain very easily. Trump started to withdraw American troops from Middle East. And as far as they withdrew, the Europeans also, as far as this withdrawal went on, terrorist attempt, terrorist act, and so on, decreased vertically and continue to decrease. Is exactly the opposite of what the media and the others want us to believe. So start from these issues and look at Afghanistan also from this point of view. What is the interest of the Taliban? To allow competitors, possible enemies, to enter the country and then cooperate with them. It's simply silly. I would never, stay in the mind of the Taliban, I would never allow. I just won a war. I just have the government of the country in my hands, and I ask people that were maybe similar to me in the past and so on. I ask them, please come here and work with us in fighting Western powers or the Americans or Chinese or whatever. It would be simply silly. There is no basic motivation on doing that. So we have a convergence of interest on different parts that can be very helpful to us if we want to care about peace and development in Afghanistan. And on the issue of development, we have positive issues also. The Eurasian Economic Corridor is a great opportunity. The Belt and Road is a huge opportunity. You see that countries involved in this chain of investment by China are benefiting about it. And the international security of the area is benefiting a lot. Pakistan got a reduction in terrorist attack that is astonishing in the last 5-6 years. And then Pakistan is growing. Pakistan's GDP is growing well. And countries in the area, Central Asia and so on, are also experiencing a process of growth, which was lacking in Afghanistan, but can be revived now. So please try to look at the situation with different eyes vis-à-vis the past. We know that invading countries, making wars and so on, does not work. It benefits only the complex industrial Congress and the security Congress we spoke, and media, and the media industry who wants to find conflicts, wars, and hostility all over, and so on. So we can give a big contribution in changing our mind and looking at the situation as it is, not the situation as we would like to be, I mean, on the other side. They want to be chaos. They want to be Afghanistan and Central Asia in flames. plenty of wars, terrorist attack, and so on. The reality is completely different. You have also the forces of peace, forces of distinction, of solidarity, that are also powerful, that are also at work. We don't have only just the forces of war and the forces of violence. You have on the ground also other forces, and we have to recognize the way they could operate and sustain them. Thank you.
Yes. Helga, did you have anything you wanted to say? I wanted to make sure I asked you.
Just very briefly, I think the shame of the failure is a big factor, which I would not underestimate. I did actually read the Afghanistan papers when they came out, because we had published already in 2010 an Afghanistan white book where we basically said all the things which came out in the Afghanistan paper, namely that this war was totally ill-conceived. It could not function because if you define a war in the wrong way from the very beginning, how can you expect to be victorious? And the Afghanistan papers, they proved, the generals, including Rumsfeld, they said, oh, we did not know who the enemy was. We didn't know who we were fighting. We had no idea what was going on out there. And I think that has to sink in. And I fully agree with Pino Arlacchi that, the regional powers, first of all, the Afghanistan people themselves, the regional forces have to take a much larger role. And I really don't think that German security is being defended at the Hindu Kush, as the former defense minister Scholz once said. And I don't think, I think people have to evaluate what happened. And the gravy train, I mean, there are even means to, to appease the people behind the gravy train, namely when you have a reconversion. I mean, you could produce with the same equipment what you are producing, bombs and drones and missiles and grenades and whatnot. You can retool these things and produce useful things. We have a world famine of biblical dimensions. That's what David Beasley keeps saying ever so often. Hundreds of millions of people are in danger of starvation. We have a pandemic which is not under control, as we now can see. Even Delta is developing new strains, which may be much more difficult to conquer. So we need a change of the thinking, not just in respect to Afghanistan. I think the Afghanistan crisis for me is, on the one side, I want the problem in Afghanistan to be solved, peace through development. We discussed this. But I think it's a much larger issue. I think, we have reached a point where we have to change our thinking. There was something wrong. I mean, in Germany, for example, we have a huge crisis right now because, people are talking about the resignation of Merkel, who will be out in 5 weeks anyway. There's even talk about impeachment of Biden. And people are losing the trust in government. They're losing the trust because in Afghanistan, the soldiers were let to die for nothing. So the people are asking 20 years for nothing. There is a surge of post-traumatic disorder erupting where people who were in these wars several years ago, now that everything seems to have been in vain, people acting up and their traumas are coming back. There was this century flood in 2 regions in Germany, which is still not under control. This is in Germany. And it now turns out this was not the climate change. It was a lack of investment in infrastructure and in the clear, defined measures which are needed to control such problems when you do the kinds of basins and pipes and systems. You can avoid this. There was no warning. So we are in a much larger turmoil than just Afghanistan. And I really think one has to consider all of this because we have reached a point where we have to rethink where is mankind going.
Yeah. Yes, Ray?
Just a couple of small points here. Again, I congratulate Professor Arlacchi for putting a immediate perspective on these things. With respect to the minimal conversions that people see, the interests that are shared by immediate neighbors and close neighbors of Afghanistan, I would simply say this is the way to go, but only with a clear-eyed understanding that the last 20 years of experience of U.S. foreign policy, specifically toward this area, would need to change, would need to have this metanoia, this change of attitude, okay? Otherwise, there are some in our country that see advantages in terrorism and advantages in tweaking the nose of the Russian bear and also confronting China. So what's important here is the need for this metanoia. And as I mentioned 3 weeks ago, metanoia doesn't come automatically. Sometimes it comes due to the force of events. You know, it may be that U.S. policymakers, including President Biden, will come to their senses in view of what's happened over the last couple of weeks. The other thing here has to do with what regional countries can accomplish. And again, I said 3 weeks ago, over the horizon strikes into Afghanistan, keeping U.S. troops there past August 31, there needs to be a loud outcry from regional and super regional powers like Russia and China. No, we don't want over the horizon attacks on Afghanistan. Okay, now these may seem remote possibilities right now, but we know what the McGovern, military intelligence and so forth, media complex can cause. Last thing I'll say is in response to Helga's appeal for some comment on the implications for other countries, specifically the West, I would say. And there are just two vignettes that I would adduce. One has to do with those videos that show all those people running alongside the C-17s and so forth. They are going, Helga can talk to you more about this than I can, but they're going worldwide, specifically in Western Europe. How about Germany? A few people realize that the Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had 3 very, very large aircraft hovering over Kabul exactly 6 days ago, last Sunday, trying to land so they could extricate German diplomats, German citizens, and people who helped the Germans, okay? They couldn't land. They had to go back to Uzbekistan somewhere to refuel. I mean, look at those pictures. The runways were full of people. Now, what does that tell a German audience? The last thing here is the news today that the U.S. is sanctioning Russia. What for this time? Oh, for Nord Stream and for this fellow Navalny. Well, hello. You know, what does that have to do with anything real? And I think I would say one more time that the German decision to go ahead with Nord Stream 2 in cooperation with Russia, despite the loud protests from every U.S. president recently, is a liminal event. It's to be welcomed as an indication that Germany can stand on its own 2 feet, can see its own economic potential and growth more important than diktat from Washington. And as the Germans look at Nord Stream 2 now, they know that a deal has been cut with Biden. So why is the Russian why is the United States sanctioning Russia now? So it's very transparent that the Mickey Mouse needs an enemy, right? And if we can't find a credible enemy, well, we'll make one. And that's what we have to be aware of. And that's why the immediate neighbors of Afghanistan have to make it clear to the U.S. and everybody else, no, that's enough. 20 years is enough. You lost. Go home.
Okay, very good. So Mr. Schultz, you have anything you'd like to add at this point? We're going to come to you in a minute, Mr. Arlacchi, because we've already, by the way, decided that once we hear from Mr. Schultz, we're Diane and I have consulted, and there's going to be we have a double question, and then we're going to go to concluding remarks. We're trying to make sure you stay around for that. So go ahead.
No, I totally agree with what just has been said, and I don't want to add anything more. I think it was a very clear statement we just heard, and the main thing the public gets to know, and the second thing is education. I think the mindset of people, especially through the media in our free countries, is still so in this old, or we have fallen back into this old paradigm of good and bad, and the bad Russians and the good West. And I think this has to change, and this changes through information and through education. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so Mr. Arlacchi, you had your hand up. Are you just saying goodbye to him?
No, I was just approving what I just heard, and so I'm ready to answer some question, and then before going.
Very good. So, Diane, you want to go ahead with that question, your double question?
Sure. Yes, two. One is a question that comes in from Khalid Latif, who's the executive director of the Center of Pakistan and International Relations, which is a major think tank in Islamabad. And I think given the terrorism we heard of earlier today in Pakistan, it's quite timely. He says, the success of CPEC, and by extension, the entire Belt and Road Initiative, is largely dependent on events unfolding in Afghanistan. Do you foresee Afghanistan becoming a new battle arena, along with Chinese interests in Pakistan, to be a primary target of this organized chaos? So that's one. And then related but differently, but I think important for Americans, it came in from the YouTube channel, is someone just asking, I think they want some kind of idea, how do you expect this economic development to work? Or what would it look like? So those are the two things.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Now, the first question is, yes, you're right, about terrorism and the concern of Pakistanis about possible terrorist attack to the Chinese investment there and in all Belt and Road project. Yeah, but who is interested to fund terrorist attack in the region where there is a big convergence against having disorder, instability, and terrorism? I mean, China is experiencing something like this, attack against the Chinese investments. But again, since terrorism is a political issue, terrorism is not an issue of crazy people or extremists, fanatics, and so on that go around with no reason and no rational motives. I mean, the terrorism is a phenomenon, it's a political fact. There is somebody who funds terrorism, somebody who has an interest on terrorism, and must be dealt with this mentality. So, I mean, I know the Pakistani concern about it, but they have to go a bit ahead, asking who is interested in funding it, investing resources in countering it in the right way. It means going back to the origin of a terrorist attack. On the issue of economic development of the area, I believe that the area has a huge potential that is already showing. we have substantial development going on in Central Asia since more than 10 years. Countries grow with 3, 4, 5, 6% a year, in spite of many problems they have. One important example is exactly Pakistan. So Afghanistan can be a stable Afghanistan, an Afghanistan that starts to develop, that reduce poverty, and in good relationship with all neighbors, can be an asset of the area. It was clear that Afghanistan was not that way in the last 20 years. But I believe, and I hope, that the lesson has been understood. 20 years of Western military intervention there did not work. We have to turn the page. And unfortunately, I have seen very few leaders in Europe, not at all in the United States, but in Europe, I'm seeing very few leaders going this way. I heard a very good statement by Angela Merkel. She was probably the only one who said, we did wrong. Let's change. We did all wrong. Now let's try to help all these Afghan refugees that arrives and so on. But the other European leaders didn't say nothing. Macron said nothing significant. Even the Prime Minister of my country, up to now, said nothing significant. I told you that the discussion, political discussion in Italy in this moment is talk or not to talk with the Taliban, which is really the most stupid issue. Let's talk with them and see if they are coherent with their statement, conditioning them on continuing to help to getting the European international aid, pressure them on what they are saying about respecting women's rights and amnestia, the English word, amnestia for all the people that stayed in the government, not having vendetta and bloodshed in the country. Let's challenge them on this point and make long-term plan for the development of Afghanistan. That could be quite a good example of international development. Afghanistan has a potential in terms of economic development that is huge. It has oil, it has minerals, it has potentially very good agriculture, like in past years had. Afghanistan can become a quite peaceful and productive country. I believe that if we succeed to create a favorable intellectual and political movement in this perspective, we could achieve something. And we should also believe that we can get results. It is not granted that all the time the forces of evil and violence will prevail like they did in the last 20 years.
All right, Mr. Daud. Yes, Mr. Daud.
Yeah, I would first answer the question on the economic front, and then perhaps on the terrorism part. First of all, it's quite disturbing to see, and I'm talking in a pre-COVID scenario, to see all our regional partners doing exceedingly well. Their GDP growth over 6%, whereas Afghanistan, in war, in a disturbed situation, despite the fact that they have huge natural resources, as was mentioned earlier, natural endowment which they can easily leverage. Pakistan also, when the entire region was benefiting from the Asian resurgence through economic growth, and this was happening after a long time, could not benefit because we were also affectees of the terrorism that was happening in some part of our country, and through the initiative of various governments and also by the military here in Pakistan, we were able to address this, and now we look at a future which is economically stable and prosperous. And we wish the same for people in Afghanistan, because as I said, I lead the investment attraction body of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is the neighboring province with Afghanistan, and it's on the same belt. Hardworking people, a lot of natural resources. There is water, there is sunlight, and there is whatever God can bless us. And this is just about leveraging that. And people in Afghanistan were not given a chance because they were for last 20 years in a war. Perhaps some of the younger generation don't even understand. I teach in some universities here in Peshawar, and I have students from Afghanistan, and I find them extremely pragmatic. They have a lot of entrepreneurial skills that they can leverage and also work on. And if we just can provide them the right opportunity, support them, do hand holding, and I think easily we can create that enabling environment which can attract investment, from the West, which were actually earlier involved in a situation which only brought war and destruction. I think it's time for the world to realize, support the region to come closer, because any good happening in any part of the world is actually it brings prosperity to everywhere. If we connect ourselves through Belt and Road Initiative, and also from the West, if a similar initiative can take place which can address poverty, I think this will be fantastic for us. And I think this is the only torch we can hand over to our next generation of prosperity. Otherwise, we'll fail as generation, and I speak for, I think, almost all of us. On the terrorism part, I think for things happening in Pakistan, I believe the situation in Afghanistan is not to be linked with it. We see challenge to China's economic growth and it becoming an economic power in such short time. And this challenge is actually difficult to absorb and stomach by some of the Western countries who could not have imagined in such short period China could, and the way that the region is prospering. Less developed countries are actually benefiting from the Belt and Road Initiative. So these challenges will come even if we have stability in Afghanistan. And I think by using technology, by poverty alleviation, bringing in projects and sustainable projects, and partnership from across the globe, I think we can address the menace of terrorism much easier than by using arms and ammunition. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Helga, do you have anything you'd like to say? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Schultz had his hand. Can we go to him first? All right, so Schultz, go ahead. I think you're muted. Hold on a minute. Jose?
Okay. Find common interest in the area to build on, like anti-terrorism fight or economy. I think that's the way to go. And I want to raise an issue here where the West is always, to me, a little pathetic on, which is using values, using democracy, using ethics as a pretended political aim when they get involved, especially when they get involved with war. Hans Morgenthau wrote, I think, that he said all these things we values and ethics should never be a political aim. It should be something which drives your action. Because if you do that, then you are example. And when you then expand on areas of common interest, the other side, the other cultural people will find out that perhaps there's something good in it, in our values, and then they will develop towards them. So I think, and it will take time, of course, but I think that is a better way than going to war like the last 20 years with thousands of people dead, many children, and then you find out that's not the way to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Helga?
Well, I think on the question of terrorism, I agree that it's not wild people running around. We should not forget the lessons from history. after all, Afghanistan is in the middle of what the British called the Great Game. It's Bernard Lewis' plan. It's the arc of crisis. The whole idea of having geopolitical destabilization, first against the Russian Tsarist empire, and then more recently against the Soviet Union. Brzezinski developed the Islamic card. This was at the meeting of the Trilateral Commission in 1975 in Tokyo. And they trained, I mean, the whole reason why you have this radical Islam is because they were taught to be more radical as a Islamic card, so-called, against the Soviet Union. And when the Soviet Union disintegrated, in part because they lost the war in Afghanistan, these networks spread, but they were kept in contact. I mean, we should not forget what General Flynn tried to communicate to Obama in 2012 of, who is supporting Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Nusra, Al-Nusra, and a lot of the radicalization came from the wrong policy. So, this is not, anyway, it's not the time to discuss it, but I think we should keep that in mind as well. And, I think that has to stop. The Great Game has to stop, and there has to be a new paradigm whereby, there is a new set of international relations based on the 5 principles of the Panchil, of, sovereignty, non-interference, respect for the other social system. I mean, we need to have a discussion about that, because I think the idea that, that there is one country dictating the rules, or rather, really the US government having been convinced to rule the world together with on the basis of the Anglo-American special relationship. I mean, that model did fail. And, when the Europeans just followed that example, they fail also. So there is a big crisis right now in Europe. Can you trust the United States? The United States can drop your allies, from one day to the next. The Russian, I think he's the National Security Council or some such position, Patrushev, he just warned the Ukraine that it could happen to them as quickly what happened to the Afghanistan government, because there is a huge convulsion, and we have now not the time to discuss all aspects of it. But I want to really emphasize that we must have a new paradigm in the international relations based on the principles of John Quincy Adams, if you want so. Because John Quincy Adams said very clearly, the aim of the United States is not to go to chase foreign monsters, but to form an alliance of perfectly sovereign republics who are working together for the common good of all. And when you look at it that way, then the American values of John Quincy Adams are very similar to what the Chinese are saying today. So the cui bono of terrorism really is with the idea of empire and not with sovereign republics. So that needs to be stated as well.
All right. So what we're going to do at this point is we're going to come to you in a minute, Ray. We're going to have summary remarks. I think we pretty much said everything, or let's put it this way. We've pretty much exhausted the topic from the standpoint of the questions and the diversity of views. So I'm going to ask that people might, at this point, state anything that you haven't had a chance to say, and otherwise make these your sort of summary remarks. And I think we'll start with Mr. Schultz, and then we'll come to Mr. Arlacchi, who has already informed us that he's got places to go and things to do.
Yeah, sorry.
So, Mr. Schultz. Can't hear you.
The mute button. Okay, the mute button.
Yeah.
Okay, you want me to give me a summary of what I have heard during this panel?
Yeah, just what your responses are.
Yeah. Yes. I'm very glad, because all the inputs, all what I've heard here falls absolutely in line with what my experience and what my thoughts and what my conviction is about war and how to get out of it or how to stop it, the change of paradigm. And again, I believe it's a matter of education, and when it comes to the cultures, it's a matter of time and patience. And I like to close with what I said in the beginning, second order of cybernetics. It is not, empathy is important, but I think the most important thing where many people have a tilt in this head built is to question themselves. And that's what I work on. And in my circles, where I can have the chance to speak or when I can write on current things, this is always my bottom line, and again. It is, there's no right and wrong out there. There are interests, and at the end of the day, people suffer and people have to die, then we're doing something wrong. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Professor Arlacchi.
Just a few words. I said already what I think about major issues. Just one small remark on Afghanistan and the future of the complex that we said is the main driver of American foreign policy, and it was the main driver of the defeat in Afghanistan. The issue is Afghanistan is over. The lemon has been squeezed. Now it's time to start another game on a different part of the world, and it is clear what is the next game. Is Russia and China as the new enemies. But in the meantime, they lost a whole part of the world. Starting from China, arriving to Turkey, there is a new Eurasian arc that now, with Afghanistan inside, is basically out of control. So as far as they move away from Afghanistan and start the new game, we have to figure out what will be the strategy, the political strategy that will cover this new game. And I believe this is a big challenge that we have to be very careful about. So it's very useful if from time to time we meet and see the situation, how it evolves. And thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you very much for being with us as well. Sometime we'll get together for that dinner that you promised me in Florence and that trip you promised me in Rome that you may not remember. Okay.
Sure. Absolutely. Even in Rome, not necessarily in Florence.
Okay. Okay, Ray, I saw you had your hand up before, and also just summary remarks. Go right ahead.
Well, I always finish my lectures and interviews to the degree I can by invoking the Noah principle. It is the following: no more awards for predicting rain, awards only for building arcs. In other words, we need to find the tools to build arcs to avoid this kind of situation that Afghanistan has suffered for the last 20 and plus years. Now, do we have such tools? Well, I'm so glad that the Afghanistan papers were mentioned before. This is perhaps the only sensible contribution the Washington Post has made to the discussion in 20 years, but they're there. They're documentary. They're very, very telling, and they show an unconscionable effort by the U.S. military and the U.S. Leaders to just keep going, even though they knew that thousands would be killed, but they would get lots of money, okay? Now, what's the problem? The problem is we try to use a tool. We try to use Craig Whitlock's incredible account from official papers from the SIGAR, again, Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction. They're all there. They're documentary. And guess what? We can't even get in the media. We can't even get into the public media. So what's the conclusion? Well, the tools are still there. I would suggest that people outside the United States, people in countries who still have a somewhat free media, even people who are just have really lucrative websites, that they need to read Craig Whitlock's expose. They need to seize little tidbits which are so telling, and need to inform the rest of the world of what's gone on in the last 20 years deliberately, that it's over and it must not be allowed to continue. Meanwhile, we go about building our own arcs with the same tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ray. All right, Mr. Daud.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you excited all of us by referring to several meal invitations that you have had. So let me first of all extend that invitation to all of you and all great speakers and participants that we've had. You know, this region is a land of hospitality and history. It's great marriage of hospitality and history. And it's in last 20 years, Afghanistan, which is also part of the region, has seen nothing, just war. So I guess this is a time to give peace a chance. This is a time to actually look at and explore beautiful lands that awaits all of us. And I hope this, as soon as this COVID is over, you can come and enjoy our local cuisine and we see a peaceful Afghanistan by then. We see peaceful Afghanistan in next 3 months and end of COVID in similar time. And let's have a prosperous world where we can all live. Let's not wait for media to project the true things, because they will do what they have to do and we will do what we have to do. So I think I commend the effort that you're doing for bringing the right word of our region, and also the issues and challenges that we have, and also the opportunities that await all of us. And it's just a matter of support and time that we can actually have a peaceful Afghanistan, a prosperous region, and a great globe to live in. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. And I wholeheartedly accept on behalf of the Schiller Institute. Not that I will necessarily be the representative, but if I happen to be, I will certainly not refuse the possibility. Now, since Diane has been there faithfully, but has not had a chance to say anything, I wonder, Diane, better take advantage of it now if there's anything you have to say before we go to our conclusion from Helga.
Well, I just would like to thank everyone who participated. I think this kind of dialogue is particularly important in the United States right now, and I'd like to thank Helga for insisting upon it, because we have a world, speaking of linear forecasting or cybernetics or so on, where people they're losing the ability to have a dialogue. People actually don't know what to do if they have a disagreement with someone. What's done on Facebook and the social media is to simply shut you down. It's not allowed to happen. And then, of course, nobody learns anything. So I just would really like to thank everyone for participating. I think this is quite urgent, and I'm sure we'll have more. I have several ideas on matters related that need to be addressed as well in separate forums.
Okay, so Helga?
Well, I got really very intrigued when I did some reading about the history of Bactria and the whole region, and this notion of the land of the 1,000 cities. Now, there was a great culture in this region about the same time when you had the classical Greek culture, and is apparently very little archaeology done so far. I think there were some significant excavations and studies done during the time of the Soviet Union. But, I think that, when we discussed the Belt and Road Initiative, which, we are now fighting for since 91, so that's 30 years. We had a program where we said that along the Belt and Road Initiative, or we called it the New Silk Road, the Eurasian Land Bridge at that time, there must be hundreds and thousands of new cities, because we will have a growing population. You need new science cities, you need modern cities, which are, not overcrowded with too many millions, but, not bigger than 1 million average. They should be beautiful. They should have beautiful architecture. They should be centers of learning, of study, of, cultural high expression. And I think that this will come. So, I think we should just keep an optimistic perspective, that we can help to cause a new era of civilization. I think the old one is just crashing down. And I think what happened around the defeat of the Afghan army is just a symptom. It's not the whole story. It's a symptom. There are many other symptoms. But we are on the verge of a new paradigm. And hopefully mankind will reach a point where we recognize that in the age of thermonuclear weapons, war cannot be a means of solving conflict. And that dialogue and the exchange of beautiful, creative ideas is the way of the future. So that's my hope.
All right. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Mr. Ulrich Schultz, Mr. Hassan Daud, Ray McGovern, Pino Arlacchi, who's not there with us at the moment, Diane Sayre, and of course, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. We hope that everybody that has listened has had the opportunity to hear what they needed to hear, to act in the way that we want you to act. We invite you to join the Schiller Institute, become members, and get involved as well with us. And we can be continuing these forums, I understand. We do it, of course, every Saturday, but we have a particular need given the urgent necessity to clarify things that are not available to the American people or people generally throughout the transatlantic world. So we want to thank especially you for participating with us today. And we will see you here in this space next week. Thank you.